Okay, let me give you a quick sketch of the plan. I'm going to run my mouth and introduce you to each of the 9 biodynamic preparations, the way I understand them. And at a little later, we will go out here on the deck and do a stirring exercise, because you really need to become acquainted with these preparations. And the best way to do that is to stir several of them in different buckets with your bare hand arm. And I'll show you how we do that. In the meantime, this is a sketch I made of the preparations 25 plus years ago, and it's been plagiarized all over the world. There's an author in England who came to a radionics conference in Georgia, saw this, put it in her book without ascribing. So I think her name is Westlake. 70 Years of Growing is the book. Okay. I founded the Josephine Porter Institute back in 1984. We had a difference of opinion with the board back in 2013. They chose to leave my farm. We're now in the process of trying to heal the rift. It was pretty painful for me. It was probably a little bit painful for them. But in the meantime, we're doing a few things to try to let people know that the most important thing is biodynamics and the preparations. How many of you have ever used the preparations before? Raise your hand. Anybody? One hand there? No. Nobody. Nobody, except my wife. She's cheating. All right. These are preparations that Rudolf Steiner gave us back in 1924 in a series of lectures. My copy that I got acquainted with was the Adams translation. There's a newer translation. I have to warn you about it because it's got some typos in it that are very, you need to know about the typos so that you can deal with the mistake, because it's important. It's a good translation in other respects, especially since it has Steiner's notes in it, which this one doesn't. At any rate, I've worn out 3 copies. This is the 4th copy I'm working on. I first became acquainted with this book in 1975. I went to the conference, the Biodynamic Farming and Gardening Association conference in 1976, the following year. At that conference, a great many young people were there. I was an old fogey of 43 at the time. And someone in the audience at the plenum at the close of the conference asked, why are these preparations such a secret? Why can't we learn how to make them? And a petite older lady stood up and says, they're no secret. I'll teach anybody who wants to know how to make them. That was Josephine Porter. I went to her farm for the next 9 years to learn how to make them. There was, at that conference, they had a sign-up sheet just outside the auditorium door, and you were asked to sign up so you could come to her farm later that fall. I was one of the many people who signed up. I was also the only one who showed up later on that fall. So there's a weakness of will forces, if you will allow me to use that phrase, when it comes to biodynamics. And part of the problem is we don't understand it. It doesn't make sense to the way we're taught and educated these days, because this is a sample. There's 2 different samples, so pass them down the audience and let them end up back in my wife's hands to be collected. This is BD 500. It is cow manure. It is placed in a cow horn and buried during the winter months. When it's dug up, it's no longer cow manure. Take a smell, feel it, touch it. You can even eat it, and I'll talk about that maybe in a little bit. It's not toxic to human beings. It is very helpful for the soil. This is the major preparation that is used to address the lack in the soil. And we put it in a container of water, 3 to 5 gallons. That's enough to do 1 acre. That little bit is enough to do 1 acre. That doesn't make sense the way we're taught nowadays. You stir it for 1 full hour. in a particular way that we will address later. So that's sprayed over 1 acre, and it builds humus in the soil. Ridiculous, isn't it? That little bit of stuff could do something to change the soil. Yes, sir.
Does it kind of sprayer, does it matter whether it's high pressure or a diaphragm sprayer?
No, in a sense. Get the preps out, number one. Number two, you can fine-tune sprayers and nozzles and all that other stuff. It wants to go on bare soil, ideally. You can also spray it on a pasture, particularly when the pasture is low from grazing or from haying or whatever. So I once had a lady in New York who got a set of preparations and was looking for the ideal stirring container. I told her it was probably a clay crock. A year later, I had another conversation with her. The preps that I had sent her a year before were still sitting there unopened because she had not found her crock. Now, we're going to be stirring in plastic buckets. That's a no-no for the purist. But guess what? These preparations are far more powerful than any plastic bucket. You didn't hear that bleeped word. So they are of a nature that they can overcome whatever detrimental qualities might come about because you're stirring in a plastic bucket. Get the job done. Get the preps on the land. The land needs them desperately. All right, that's BD 500. The next preparation is BD 501. Okay, you can almost see it. That's about a teaspoon of quartz silica ground finely, put in water again, and stirred for 1 hour and sprayed over the field again. It can go on the bare soil, but mostly you're addressing the plants. It's an atmospheric spray. It's for the plants to breathe in. Now, this particular preparation is also placed in a cow horn and buried, but for the summer months. It's buried in the summer and dug up in the late fall. Again, absurd that such a little bit of substance can make that much of a difference, but it does. The plants become, well, let me use a word that might need more explanation later, and we'll see if we get it in. The silica preparation is attuned to the cosmos. The horn manure preparation, the manure preparation 500, is attuned to the earthly force. So you have, and the plant is a being that grows between earth and sun or earth and cosmos. You need both of those forces stimulating the soil and the plant to make a difference biodynamically. We have a dreadful habit in biodynamics of just applying 500 and finding some excuse not to spray the 501 later on. And as a result, and this is true in biodynamics all over the world, but it's especially true in this country. And so the plant, it's like a three-legged stool. You put one leg on and that's all you got. It's kind of hard to balance on a three-legged stool with only one leg working. So you can do it, but it ain't easy. The third spray preparation that I want to address is 508 equisetum. Open the jar carefully, take a whiff, and this is fermented equisetum. I didn't bring any manure and I didn't bring any raw silica, but I did bring some raw equisetum. This is the equisetum plant. You can see the structure a little bit. We usually have it ground and send it out as a dried herb, ask you to make it into a tea, and we have found, based largely on the work of Lily Kalisko, that the fermented tea is going to be much more powerful than a fresh tea. The fresh tea will work. The orthodox biodynamic view, especially in Europe, is that it's only used when there's a problem with a fungus condition in plants. That is not my view. I've come to see it as much more powerful. And one of the things that I came up with back in 89 or 88 or 89 is what later became the sequential spray technique. And this is a newsletter back when I was still at JPI. One can use a series of sprays, incorporating equisetum for sure. You've got barrel compost, which is gathering all the compost preparations into one spray. Barrel compost, BD500, BD501, and 508, especially fermented. Those are applied in a particular sequence, and you can address the lack of moisture in your soils. It has also been used to deter or encourage more sunshine and drying effect, but it matters when you apply it, and that's where a biodynamic planting calendar comes in. We'll refer to the calendars a little bit later, hopefully, somewhat briefly, because that's a whole deep subject itself.
So when you're introducing, when you're starting
Yes.
on your place, what is the sequence? What do you start with?
You usually start with barrel compost, or now I would tell you to use another form of 500, which has the compost preparations in it, which we call prepared 500 or 500 XP. I don't have that described in the direction leaflet, nor does JPI have in their leaflets, which I didn't want to hand out because they have a few unfortunate typos in it. At any rate, you want to get the 500 there, you want to get the compost preparations there. Both of those, and it can be barrel compost or it can be through prepared 500. You want to get both of those applied usually in the latter part of the day towards sunset, or even after sunset. On the soil, impacting the soil as heavily as you can, which often means bare soil. If you stay for the spray and rake exercise, you'll see how we do it in a couple of the garden beds down here. At any rate, you all got this handout of lamb's quarter, how the roots look ordinarily and how they look after the soil has been treated with the biodynamic preparations, after a sequence has been used on the soil. Let me finish that sequence a little bit for you. You asked. The 501 and the 508 are applied in the morning, usually. So you have first BC and 501 silica, and then 500, and then equisetum. That's a sequence you use during when the moon is in a leaf constellation or a water constellation. And if you want to dry things up, you do the same thing, but reverse the, you put 508 as second and 501 as last, and do that in a fruit or fire, when the moon is in a fruit or fire constellation. It shouldn't work. We're manipulating the weather. We have to do it with, shall we say, a great deal of consciousness. And because when you do this the first time and you get rain, for instance, which is what most people want it for, wow, did I do that? No, you didn't. The preps did, but it works. We've seen it work at least 90% of the time. That's a pretty darn good batting average. And we can also identify possibilities as to why it didn't work due to other events in the solar system, which I would go into on the calendar subject. We have to pay, that's one of the things in biodynamics that's different than organic. Number one, the earth is a living being. Number two, it's a member of an entire group called the solar system within an entire universe, which we refer to as the zodiac. So those things are taken into account. We use planting calendars. There are different planting calendars. They don't all agree. Don't worry about that too much. What you do is use one, whichever one you care to, and pay attention to what's happening. There are a lot of things we don't know yet about it that I'm trying to explore with a few people. At any rate, all right, we've got 500, we've got 501, we've got 508. Rocco, I think you can have the 508 now if you need it for the next step. Rocco is taking care of the stirring exercise. 2 jars, both in the right alphabet bucket. Yes, sir.
How soon can you apply one preparation after the last preparation?
Well, in the sequence, it would be barrel compost this evening. If we want rain, which I don't think you do right now, but if we want rain, we'd do 501 the next morning, and 500 that evening, and then 508 the next morning. Now, there's nothing that says you can't do it all the same day. You just need the stirring and spraying help, because the 500 is stirred for an hour, the barrel compost is stirred for 20 minutes, the 501 is stirred for an hour, the equisetum is stirred for 20 minutes, usually. I think some of the literature suggests you can get by with stirring even less. But we do have a form of 500 and a 501 that you can stir for only 20 minutes. And in the lectures that Steiner gave back in 1924, he made an interesting comment that nobody's paid much attention to, and that is, he tells us about 500, tells us about applying it to the soil after we've stirred for an hour, and then he goes into his description of making 501. Somewhere in that description, he says, we can follow up the 500 spray immediately with 501. Some people have done that. I have. It's an interesting experiment. We have to do more experiments in biodynamics for sure. So, all right. Now, the compost preparations. We have the 500 and the 501 and then the 508. Those are spray preparations, and in Europe, people don't pay much attention to 508, and I was severely scolded by a Biodynamic Association board member once upon a time because I referred to the equisetum as BD 508. It's not a preparation, he says, and how dare you label it such? Well, in my use of it, it's a preparation that deserves attention far more than we've given it, and that's one of the main crusades I've been on in the years that I've been working with biodynamics. It is a bona fide preparation. It is a very powerful preparation. Steiner actually refers to equisetum more times than any other plant in the agriculture course. And so it has some importance in his mind.
Is that the same as horsetail?
Yes, horsetail herb is usually called. I'm in the habit of calling it equisetum arvens, which is how he referred to it. So, all right, then we have 6 other preparations. This is the Yarrow Preparation. It's made from the yarrow plant. Most of you are acquainted with it, and in case you're not, that's what it looks like. The blossoms, only the little florets on those stems. We clip those off. We moisten them with yarrow tea. We place them in the bladder of a stag, hang it up in the summer sun. When fall comes, bury it in the earth, and let it spend a full year in the bladder from the time we stuffed it. And stuffing is usually when yarrow comes ripe or a little after, which is for Woolwine, Virginia, where I am, is late May and June. And this is the finished product. That's a teaspoon in each of those containers. Steiner says you can use it to treat a compost pile as big as a house. Well, this is a house. It's a pretty big compost pile. In general, however, we use one set or one unit of each of the preparations, more or less a teaspoon, to treat a compost pile of 10 to 15 tons. That's 6 to 8 feet wide, 4 to 5 feet high, and 10 to 15 feet long. So that's still a pretty big pile. And it transforms the material into very fine compost. How it does it, we do not know. We haven't figured it out. There's a lot of mystery to the preparations. And the Yarrow preparation is, as this crib sheet tells you, it permits plants to attract trace elements in extremely dilute quantities for their best nutrition. This is a statement either by Kalisko in a book called Agriculture of Tomorrow, which is long out of print, or else something Steiner himself said. I went through a lot of literature and picked out certain descriptive phrases to pinpoint the effects or results that each of these preparations would give you.